Hello! Happy Arbor Day, folks. Welcome to today's program brought to you by the United States Botanic Garden. My name is Libby Rhodes. I am the Chief of Learning and Outreach at the United States Botanic Garden. We're so happy to have you joining us today for our plant science conversations, keeping tabs on trees with Dr. Murphy Westwood and Devin Dotson, who is in for our director, Dr. Susan Pell. Dr. Murphy Westwood is the Vice President of Science and Conservation at Morton Arboretum. There, she works to strengthen the Arboretum's leadership activities in tree science and conservation. Murphy supports the Arboretum's efforts to improve the health of the urban forest in the Chicago region, protect threatened tree species around the globe, and provide professional leadership to the world's arboreta. Devin Dotson is the Senior Communications Specialist for the United States Botanic Garden. In his work, he combines his multiple decades of professional communications experience with his personal passion for plants and gardens. Throughout his work at the garden, Devin furthers our mission in inspiring people to appreciate, study, and conserve plants to enrich society locally and globally. So with that, I'll say welcome to Murphy and Devin.
Thank you, Libby. We're excited to have everybody here with us today. We are celebrating Arbor Day in part with this conversation to learn more about the great work, especially that's being done over on your side of the country, Murphy, at Morton Arboretum. How are you guys celebrating the day?
Thanks, Devin. Happy Arbor Day. Well, we have a lot going on at the Arboretum for Arbor Day. This is our signature day of the year. We're all big tree huggers, as I'm sure you will not be surprised to hear. So we've got lots of tree planting events happening today, actually throughout the Chicago region. As soon as I'm finished with this webinar, I'm going to a tree planting event that our Chicago Region Trees Initiative, our urban forestry program, is leading at an elementary school in the Chicago area here. But we also have our big plant sale that's going on this weekend. So lots of different ways to engage our community in trees.
That's pretty exciting. Part of the story today that I think we want to talk about is one, a little bit about you and your career working with trees and plants, and also sort of some of the cool projects that that Morton is working on and U.S. Botanic Garden is participating in. But maybe to sort of start off, though, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get your start in public horticulture?
Well, I I think probably many folks potentially in the green industry or plant science world, I was not entirely aware that this was a career trajectory that one could have. And so I went to college as an English major. And after a couple of years doing no English and taking all environmental science and climate change and botany classes, my academic advisor said, perhaps you shouldn't do English. It looks like you really like plants. And so I said, yeah, I do. Is that a thing? Can I do that? And she said, yeah, you should go look at our School of Natural Resources. So I was at the University of Michigan and I went into their Natural Resource and Environment program, and it graduated in the end with environmental policy degree. And then after that, I did my master's at Imperial College in London, and I worked in the botany department of the Natural History Museum. And that's what really got me hooked on museums and public gardens. And I worked at the Royal Botanic Garden at Kew. And then I did my PhD at Cambridge in the UK, and walked around the same botanic garden that Charles Darwin formulated his theory of evolution in. And so I was like, well, that's pretty cool. I think I need to keep doing this.
I love that. That's pretty awesome. I see in the comments we have, you're not the only English major who fell into another career. And
Oh,
so
really? Great.
right. I love that. Sounds like you found a passion for plants and the environment. At what point, how did that transition into a journey that was researching and advocating for trees specifically?
Yeah. So I've always had my career, like I said, sort of once I figured it out and got on the right path in plants. And then I started at the Morton Arboretum about 12 years ago, and was really blown away by the power of trees, basically. I think that trees can be so sort of, they're kind of taken for granted, right? Like you walk around, you kind of take a look around you and you think, oh, there's just trees everywhere, that they must just spontaneously appear. And in fact, the more I've studied trees over the last decade and and really kind of thought about them beyond even just like the sort of scientific elements of it, but the public health benefits of trees, the cultural and community benefits of trees. They just really are. I feel like the study of trees and the understanding and appreciation of trees and the protection of trees is more important now than ever before. And so I'm really very I'm really excited about, and I think where I've really found my niche is in the intersection between understanding like the science behind trees, understanding their biology, their ecology, their evolution, but then really translating that into real world, everyday practices that can support and enhance trees for a greener, healthier, more beautiful world. So where I get really excited is about kind of having that scientific background, but thinking about like, how can I communicate that in a really tangible way? How can we implement practices that really secure trees for the future?
I was just thinking, you made a comment about trees not spontaneously appearing. Can you imagine if they did? The world would be a different place. Instead, right, we need people who are really thinking about trees and advocating and planting trees and caring for trees, like you and Morton Arboretum are doing, which I think maybe is a nice segue. Can you tell us more about your specific role? What is it that you do there at Morton Arboretum?
Sure. So the Morton Arboretum is a large public garden. It's about 25 miles west of the city of Chicago. We are a 1,700 acre living tree museum. So it's a pretty big site by public garden standards. We have about 400 employees and over 1 million visitors a year that come to the Morton Arboretum. So as a place, as a location, we have dozens of different gardens and exhibitions and locations that you can walk through. We have a big children's garden. We have art exhibitions. We have cultural events. We have wine tasting. We have, the 10K, runs that you can do across our 16 miles of trails and 9 miles of road. So it's a wonderful location and a destination. But it is also an environmental and research and education organization. So we are founded on, and we were founded actually over 100 years ago for the study and understanding and planting of trees. So I oversee our science and conservation department, which includes several different kind of flagship programs. Our Chicago Region Trees Initiative is our urban and community forestry program that focuses on increasing the health and diversity and equitable distribution of the tree canopy across the Chicago region. We have a global tree conservation program that focuses on saving threatened trees from extinction, especially around the world in global biodiversity hotspots. We also have our Center for Tree Science, which is our research program, our PhD scientists studying, fundamental questions in tree evolution and science and ecology, biodiversity, systematics. So we do a lot, that's where we do a lot of our kind of fundamental, more sort of experimental, hypothesis-driven science that we can then translate into action. And we also oversee ArbNet, which is a global interactive community of arboreta that works to advance and support professionalism and collaboration and just sort of the management and operations of arboreta worldwide. And we have an accreditation program for arboreta that we run through that as well. So lots of different programs in our science and conservation department. Our herbarium is also embedded in science and conservation. So a fantastic team, about 60 people on my team, just doing wonderful, wonderful work, and I get to just enjoy learning from them every day.
I love that. It is wonderful work, and you guys do such a wide variety. I think for some people, they might be surprised when we say trees, and then they think it might just be one or two things. But you guys are, I think, really showing through example that it's many things to care for many different types of trees in many different places. You made a comment a little bit ago about sort of the benefits of trees in communities and for communities. And I wonder, thinking of that community thread, how's the work that you guys are doing at Morton Arboretum connecting with communities there in the Chicago area? What's the community connections?
Yeah, so there are several. one of our programs, which I mentioned, our Chicago Region Trees Initiative, has a range of different ways in which we can engage and support communities. So we have a stewardship team, which really works almost from a kind of like grassroots, like kind of bottom up type of level, where we work with schools or block clubs or environmental justice organizations or places of worship, churches, mosques. We work with various different community groups to plant trees, to care for trees. We help them with we'll host a tree identification walk in their community. We plant food forests and food gardens. We'll also do kind of neighborhood greening efforts with our local community groups, and that's a very kind of more like grassroots type of tree planting work and tree care work and educational programs. We also work with municipalities, public entities. So we will work with cities or park districts to help them improve their tree care ordinances, to review and sort of reflect on how at the municipal level their trees are managed. We have templates that communities can use for creating their own tree care ordinances or tree protection policies. We provide guidance on how to secure tree care practices or tree care companies that are going to come in and do work for municipalities who maybe don't have a forestry department or, a lot of expertise in that area. So a range of different kind of capacity building, educational opportunities. We do sapling giveaways, all sorts of different kind of ways to get people engaged with trees, and a lot of education around the benefits of trees, how to care for them, why they're good for you, the information that you can take to your elected officials to say we should have more trees or healthier trees, or we should get rid of the invasive species that are, taking over this forest preserve. And so we work at many different levels with communities. We also administer many grant programs as well. So we will sort of secure resources, whether that's at the sort of local, state, federal level, and then we can deliver those to communities that don't have the funding or resources to support their tree canopy.
It's a good quantity. I love that one of the things you do is sort of a tree walk in communities to help people learn about what trees are there in their communities. And I think, being in the public horticulture sector, we both know, right, that getting people the opportunity to just see and experience and learn a little bit more about the plants around them helps deepen their awareness and connection with those plants and want to help steward them and care for them and make a better life for them and the many benefits that they give us. And so it's a pretty nice way to start that engagement. U.S. Botanic Garden has been able to collaborate with Morton Arboretum for several years now. Actually, between our organizations, we've accomplished some pretty cool things together. I'd like to maybe talk about a few of those things that we've been able to do. I will say, we're short and fast on time today, and so let's talk about a few projects, and we can always circle back in the future if anybody wants to know more. We'll share more info. One of them is this big U.S. tree assessment, right? This is a big project, and I think this is definitely a cool item to talk about. And so maybe one of the opportunities is, let's talk about this 881 species of U.S. trees that was the first ever full tree assessment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this was such an exciting project. So, Devin, I think we've been working on this for like 10 years with you guys, maybe. It has been a while. This was a huge undertaking. Actually, this was part of a global effort that kicked off about a decade ago called the Global Tree Assessment, which was a big initiative, a very kind of collective, collaborative effort among the world's botanic gardens and kind of plant experts. Largely led by an organization called Botanic Gardens Conservation International, with BGCI, which is a big public garden network that you are a part of, we are a part of. And really the motivation was to get a much better understanding of the state of the world's tree species. We honestly did not know how many tree species there were in the world, even a decade ago. We got together with U.S. Botanic Garden, with NatureServe was another good early partner in this, many other botanic gardens, as well as BGCI. And we basically said, I wonder what the state of trees in the U.S. is. There's this big global tree assessment underway. I wonder what things are looking like for the U.S. And so we contributed to initially this big report that you're seeing now, the State of the World's Trees. And our goal was to really understand how threatened the native tree species of the US were. And that information existed in very patchy places, in many different places. There were sort of inconsistent listings of what were our native tree species. There was a wide range of numbers. None of them were sort of based on a kind of consistent concept or definition of a tree. So we just wanted to standardize this information. We wanted to work with our colleagues and partners across, public gardens, as well as like the Forest Service and a bunch of other entities that were a part of this big initiative. Collaboration was really key. And over the course of about 5 years, we established a list of the 881 native tree species to the contiguous 48 United States. And we either reviewed or refreshed or started from the very beginning something called a threat assessment for every single one of those species. And a threat assessment basically takes into account what the distribution of the species is, how it's used, does it have pests and diseases, is it being overharvested, is its habitat getting destroyed? What are some of these kind of basic demographic and ecological indicators for that species? And then we can use all that information to essentially apply some thresholds and some criteria on whether or not it is at risk of extinction. And we used 2 different methods for this: the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN Red List, and then NatureServe's global threat ranks. And that is how we came to this conclusion that almost 1 in 6 of the nation's native tree species are threatened with extinction.
Yeah, you're sharing a Washington Post story there. I mean, we were able to get a good quantity of communications coverage on this, both in the U.S. and around the world, as part of this global listing. And I think our goal is to try to just help people understand. Right? We have a wide diversity of plants and trees native here in the United States, but there are issues. And one of the ones spotlighted there is invasive insects, right? Deadly diseases. And we're seeing, with climate change, that's also exacerbating some of these issues. Maybe not killing off some of those pests in the winter and stuff, right? And so. Thank you for sharing that. This will just share some spotlights. I know that Courtney has dropped into the tab for our listeners, right? If you want to learn more about this specific threat assessment, some of the things that were found, some of the summaries from it, and maybe even a few potential things that could be done going forward, check out that link. In line with I think we're having some issues there, but it says it's been restored. I think one of the issues we were having, you're with me there. There we go. Libby was making sure all is good. Was cultivating some native U.S. trees that were maybe not known to be in cultivation. They were rare, threatened, and a lot of those are oaks. That also ties into this, right? Maybe can we do a 90-second summary of some of those rare oak work that we've been working on?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the interesting things that we found with this study was that there are a couple of groups, like you mentioned, of species that just are really highly threatened in the U.S. Oaks and hawthorns are one of them, or a couple of them. And so one of the areas that we found a lot of a kind of like hotspot, you could say, of threatened oaks is in Southwest Texas. And there are a handful of species down there, species like Quercus. So Quercus is the genus for oaks, tardifolia, carminiensis, Emorii. This is Quercus oglethorpensis, another one of these threatened oaks. And so U.S. Botanic Garden has been a fantastic partner at supporting collecting efforts and plant exchange efforts. So we're both going out to do survey work to find these rare oaks, especially in the South and the Southeastern United States. And then collect that material, some of which has never been collected before, has never been in botanic gardens where they can be conserved, kind of like a living gene bank. And we've exchanged them with public gardens and conservation organizations, as well as like Forest Service sites across the country, to secure and reinforce these populations, sort of an insurance policy against extinction for some of these rarest oak species that we have in the US. It's really exciting work.
And that living gene bank concept is important for plants like oaks, right? Which can't be as traditionally seed banked, right? And so those acorns can't be just put into a freezer. They've got to be sort of living and kept alive, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have actually quite a lot of our native tree species are what we would call exceptional. It means they can't, their seeds or their acorns, in the case of oaks, can't survive in a traditional seed bank, like a freezer, basically. So that's actually the motivation, one of the motivations behind some of the conservation networks that we have helped to lead and be a part of, and that the U.S. Botanic Garden has been a big partner in, such as the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak.
Which you guys are leading, right? And I love that you guys are leading the call for this. And this is global, right? And that's something maybe to think about for plants. A number of times, plants don't stop at a national border, right? And so things like the oaks, you're talking about the hotspot, which sort of sometimes continues over into Mexico. But these sort of opportunities to work at the global level, might you share sort of why that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, exactly like you said, some of these, especially, so oaks are almost kind of globally distributed, especially northern hemisphere distributed group of trees. In many cases, like you said, these plants aren't going to respect geopolitical boundaries, right? If only it were that neat and tidy, but it's not. And so it's really, really critical that as a global network of public gardens, that we're working really closely with partners across the range of many of these different species. So through some of these networks like the Global Conservation Consortium for Oak and our Center for Species Survival for Trees, which is what the Morton Arboretum has been recognized as in partnership with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, we've really been working to build these global partnerships so that we can make sure that none of these species are sort of falling through the cracks, and so that we can really work together to ensure that species are conserved across their range. So we have lots of really wonderful partners in places like Mexico and Central America. And we're kind of doing these collecting trips and this survey work, as well as a lot of genetic research to understand where are there levels of genetic diversity that need to be captured and conserved, and really kind of understand the underlying diversity of these important tree species across our range. So, this is an example of a field trip in this picture here that we did with like 8 or 10 different botanic gardens and partners in Southwest Texas to identify and survey for some of these really rare oaks in that region.
There's a lot of cool work. I think we'll just have to have a further conversation to continue, because I know we're sort of running out of time. And I want to pull one or two questions from our chat. We've got one here that Catherine asked specifically: how does this new checklist of 881 native trees differ from the previous checklist of U.S. native trees?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we didn't sort of discover any sort of new species through this process. It was really about reconciling names. So there's a lot of issues with checklists where one scientist might recognize something and say that it's 2 species, and another scientist might actually think that it's just one big species. So it was really about kind of solidly defining what we mean when we say a tree, because there isn't actually one consistent definition of a tree, which can also make it messy. So our list is sort of a kind of cleaner, tidier, I think kind of like easier way to sort of say, here is the list that aligns. And like the unique thing about it is that it really solidly aligns with that global tree assessment, so that we can compare apples to apples, as it were, with sort of the rest of the world.
One other question: emerald ash borer, clearly an issue. There's a person asking about, do you have a recommendation of a tree that would be a good replacement plant if ash has been killed off?
That's a great idea. That's a great question. So yes, ash are definitely disappearing from our forests, especially in sort of the eastern part of the United States. All of the eastern U.S. ash species are under some level of threat because of emerald ash borer. I would actually recommend that you contact whoever your local botanic garden is, because the best tree for your conditions is going to be highly geographically dependent. So here in the Chicago region, if you want sort of a wetter native species, a swamp white oak is pretty resilient to wet areas. Some of our ash are quite, resilient to that. But it's going to depend a lot where you are and like what your native species are, and then the conditions of where you're growing. So there's no one right answer to that question. We want to just make sure you're planting the right tree in the right place and giving it the right care. And the best resource you can go to is your local botanic garden or arboretum. At the Morton Arboretum, we have a plant clinic, and we've got lots of resources online to help you select the right tree for the right place based on your conditions, your soil, your sun, the hardiness zone that you're in. So please connect with your local botanic garden or arboretum to find out what would be best in your area.
Looks like he's in New Hampshire. And if you don't know what's in your area, for all of you, we're members of the American Public Gardens Association. You can go to publicgardens.org and you can look by location and find botanic gardens that are members throughout the country, including several in and around the New Hampshire area, but wherever you are, right, that'd be relevant for all the people. So it's a great idea to reach out to your local garden or extension. We're coming up on the end of our time here. These conversations are short and fast. I want to sort of say, as we close this conversation out for today, what are some ideas that you might propose that our audience could do to help celebrate Arbor Day and trees?
Oh, so much you can do. I mean, what I would say, connecting back to what we talked about earlier, Devin, I think it's easy for people to think that threatened trees are sort of off in the wilderness and totally unrelated to maybe if you're living in an urban area, like what you can do at home. But there's so much you can do just in your community and in your home that supports trees really and tree diversity across the country. So make sure you're planting the right tree in the right place with the right care. Tell your neighbors and friends about the benefits of trees and how important they are. Advocate for trees in your community, because really it is such an important sort of basic good that we can do to make our communities healthier and stronger and more resilient. So go outside, appreciate trees, tell your friends and neighbors about trees. If you have the time or capacity or resources, you can volunteer in your local protected area, do some habitat restoration work. But I would just say be a tree hugger, not just today, but every day. Be a tree advocate. And if there's one sort of little piece of advice I would say, what we really want in our urban forests right now is diversity. The sort of more diversity we can have in our forests, the better. So if you love what's in your neighbor's yard, plant something different.
Well, that's a good tip. It might also be relative to that to think about maybe reaching out to your city or county and checking to see if they have any resources to share. I know here in the DC area, you can actually get free native trees to plant on your property. And so that, I think, is a program that many cities and counties do offer. And so that might be something nice for people to look up, no matter where they are, to see if that might be an opportunity. And they probably would also help them with the diversity of not just offering a single species and maybe giving you some variety to plant in your yard. Murphy, thank you. Honestly, this has been stellar. Just to pause for a moment and celebrate trees today and all the great work that Morton is doing. And honestly, it's wonderful for us at United States Botanic Garden to get to collaborate with you guys on so many wonderful tree projects across the United States. And we're looking forward to more. And so I think maybe we'll follow up in the future for all of you that are interested in learning more about trees and the cool work. We'll see if we can't do something again in the future.